All right, we are going to get started. Like I said just a minute ago, Amy's taking care of something this morning. She'll join us as soon as she finishes that up. But I had the first portion of this today anyway, and so we'll get started along those lines. I'm going to open us in prayer, and then we'll get started. God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather this morning, even as we are thinking and going in 10 different directions as we finish up the week's work, as we get ready for Sunday's work. We ask that you be with us in this time as we learn and as we grow and as we ask ourselves, what's next? We ask that you be in all that we talk about, work through us, and sometimes in spite of us. In your son's name, amen. So my name is Michelle Moore. I am the Director of Discipleship and Leadership Development for the Arkansas Conference. Most of you know me from still conference work, but I've shifted some from age level specific ministry with children's, youth, young adults into kind of an overarching discipleship piece to that. And then also still doing all of the work with Culture of Call. And so I am kind of combining all of those pieces and still figuring out what that looks like in the work that was already being done, but then what do we do to kind of add to that? And so today I will be sharing some ideas for online discipleship, and the way that I've kind of divided it is the areas that we would already talk about, whether it's online or not, right? So worship and hospitality and different age levels. And so, faith formation, like all of those pieces are different. It's just how you approach it. And so we're going to share some of those. I have some parts where I'd want to hear kind of what you're doing or what your ideas are. At any point, if you have questions, please, put your hand up. I have it on gallery view, so I think I can see if you want to unmute or put the little emoji hand or whatever, and we'll go that way. Or if you have questions, but you don't want to interrupt the flow yet, and just get to it later, if you can stick them in the chat, we can do that. Like I said, there is a link to the document with all of the resources that I'll mention in the chat. If you notice that I referred to something and you can't find it on that, please make a note of it in the chat and I'll go back and add it to make sure that you do have access to everything mentioned. Discipleship ministries for like the board of discipleship in our kind of global UMC has done some great work already around discipleship in the various areas. And so a lot of the ideas are basically putting some very well thought out, but maybe longer and wordier documents into kind of a summary today. And so that first link in that resource document is kind of the big online discipleship PDF. You can download it for free. You can buy it on your you can buy a paper copy if you want it mailed to you, if you're more of a highlight and all that. But I downloaded the PDF and then went from there so that you can save a little money. But a lot of the ideas are from that piece. And so we're just putting it in context, right? So the first question before we get into some details around worship and hospitality and what does it look like to do all those pieces, but online in a virtual setting and things like that is, I would love to know in the grand conversation, overarching, not just online conversation, but just as a general kind of conversation starter. What does it look like? What does discipleship look like in your church? When you talk about discipleship, or your pastor talks about discipleship, or your staff talks about discipleship, or your congregation have conversations and leadership settings around that, even if you don't use the word discipleship, what do you think what do you think people would answer of what is happening in your church around discipleship? This might be a little bit of a trick question. Yeah.
I think my people would say it looks like finding new opportunities to reach out to the community around us, as well as joining together in different ways to learn together, to do Bible studies, and offering people the opportunity to participate in other groups. We have Stitches for Christ and some different things like that, as well as our food pantry and the other things that we do. I think that's all discipleship, and I think that's what they would say.
Okay, Beth, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I think for me, I feel like I'm playing catch up right now because I was at my new church for 1 month and then I was on medical leave for a month and then I'm just getting back in September. And they had been without a pastor for a full year. And so I feel like for me, the discipleship is almost like one-on-one now because I'm getting to know them, getting to know what their needs are, and trying to design something, even if it's just lunch with this one or a phone visit with that one, and then a couple of them doing this or whatever. I really think that I'm just really in a learning stage. That's how I feel right now. So I'm hoping to get some good thoughts here. So.
Okay. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody moving to unmute. So one of the things, the more I have asked questions as I started this new kind of, not new position, but reshaped position to churches and to pastors and to congregation members and to just lay leaders around, is I think part of our struggle is that discipleship, kind of like evangelism, the words get associated with very churchy seminarian level understanding, right? And we don't necessarily talk about how discipleship is just kind of what you're doing to further your faith, right? Like there's a pathway across that, and we want to make sure that we understand what the goal is there for disciples of Christ, but we also, I think sometimes we don't necessarily make it easily digestible. And so one of the biggest things as we move forward in any of these topics of discipleship, whether it's online or not, is to remind ourselves that using the word discipleship does not necessarily explain to those who we are trying to invite into that, to this discipleship plan of whatever that looks like in our church. They don't necessarily know what that means. And so using different forms of invitation and hospitality, and intentional kind of setting and an invitation, sets those pathways out without using words that are intimidating or not understood or makes you feel like, well, I'm not a pastor, so I don't know that, you know. And so I want you to keep that in mind as we talk through some of these ideas. Is all of this is discipleship, but some of this, when it's broken down, makes it a lot easier for your congregation members and for your lay members to latch onto and to do well, because it's not as intimidating when it's part of this overarching, here is our master discipleship plan, right? And so when we break it down, it's going to be less intimidating and easily understandable. But then everyone is a part, like Gail said, that you're a part of this bigger plan. You just didn't necessarily realize it because of sometimes we use church fancy words. So I want to read a few different definitions, and I think this is the beauty of discipleship in general, is that there's so many different ways to explain this, and it all gets to the same heart of the definition of discipleship, but it describes it in multiple ways, which is what every church does, right? We describe our discipleship pathway for our members in multiple ways, and there are multiple ways that even within a local church, folks can explore and continue to deepen their faith. So the first definition is: a disciple worships, is part of a community, commits to spiritual formation or practices, is generous and serves, and is seeking to be Christ-like. Second definition: a disciple is a witness to Jesus Christ in the world who follows his teachings through acts of compassion, justice, worship, and devotion under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Third, a disciple is one who knows Christ, is growing in Christ, serving Christ, and sharing Christ. And then the fourth, a disciple is a grace-filled follower of Jesus who puts faith in action. So, and there's lots of others. We could all write our own definition of a disciple, and it could be right, but they would all kind of define in a different way what that looks like, right? The theme that I see, even in just those four, is there are action words, right? They are ongoing ing words. So it's not a disciple is a person who finishes the race, right? A disciple is not a person who checks off all the boxes and is done. It is a continued process. And so some of the pieces that we're going to talk through is how can we create space for those processes to continue, knowing that everybody approaches and comes to church in a different place, right? We have seekers who show up and who need a beginning point. But then we also have folks who are deeply faithful and have lived that, but need places to get deeper and serve. And so we're going to talk through what that looks like, but we're also going to talk about it in the context of we recognize that we are living in a digital age, especially post-COVID. People have relied very heavily on digital, virtual, online, however you want to phrase it, connecting points. And so we have to recognize that those pieces to be online and connected virtually is not just an extension of the existing ministries that we have in our church. They are complete ministries in themselves, and we have to look at that. I think one of the biggest mistakes that churches are kind of living into the post-COVID world is when COVID was in its prime and we were all figuring out how to do everything online, we did everything intentionally, sometimes well, online because everyone was in that same space. When people started coming back to in-person, there were very few that we've seen be able to do both well, right? Because you are either concentrating heavily on those in person because they're back and that's what we're used to and that's how church works and always has worked. And then the online folks became spectators instead of participants. And so they became people who are watching the service, but not necessarily participating in similar ways that we were so intentional about when everyone was watching. We created ways for you to not miss everything, but not necessarily ways for folks to engage in everything. And that means that we have to shift our focus on not just providing an online way to connect, but an actual plan for how those online engage in a different way. So, a long time ago, we had this, revelation in churches that we created, we needed, hip and cool contemporary worship, right? And it's not, I'm saying that in a cheeky way. We go to our modern worship service. But part of what we did with that is we saw that there was a need to meet the needs for folks who needed something that looked a little different than high church or traditional church, or that was more invitational or more casual, or however you define that for the need, whether it was more family friendly or whether it was just more relaxed, or it was for the people who didn't have dress clothes to dress up, whatever the need was in that local setting, we created this other opportunity. In a similar way, we're creating these other opportunities for folks who can't physically be in person or who aren't ready for that, who are still exploring and need that kind of boundary of a screen. But we also aren't necessarily still asking the right questions of how do we ensure that there is a next step for them? And also being okay if the answer is that next step is still online. I think a lot of our stuff is geared towards, we're going to get you hooked and we're going to make sure that our website is attractive so you know the answers to all of the basic questions, or we're going to make sure that we have a decent streaming service that is, that doesn't have glitches and that is runs well and is live. And, that there's some emoji pieces to it, which is important. There's not a next step for the following through of when you show up, what do we do? how are you invited back into that next piece of discipleship? And what does discipleship look like when it starts online and continues in a digital or virtual stance? Let me pause by saying, I understand that it is important to be present in church, and I'm not trying to implicate that we are in, that I'm not trying to get to an idea that we should only offer, that folks just, it's fine just to check off the box and watch church. But I do think that we recognize in the growing age of, where we are, is that we have a whole nother group of people that are not the traditional shut-ins who do not travel, do not drive, need to stay home for safety's sake, that are interested in engaging, but are not going to engage in a different way because of how they connect to the world in any other way. So not promoting don't be in person, but we are just going to recognize in this conversation that there are folks who are looking for another way. Okay, share the link. And then there's two kind of things to remember as we talk about all of these pieces before we go into specific areas. One is, as we talk through all these areas, I want you to keep in mind the people who come to your mind who are present and active in your congregation, who would buy into this idea, right? Who get the bigger picture of online ministry and why. Because the worst thing we could do is say, we're going to offer this great opportunity to engage in a virtual, way with those who are seeking that, and then put somebody in charge of it who basically says, you need to have your physical body in church. And I'm not, I don't understand this. And so you've got to have the people who get the big picture, get the people who, that person who understands why this is a part of our existence as a church world now, and why the conversation is happening. And so the first is, so as you're hearing some of these, I hope that you can kind of think through, maybe jot down some names of I think this person could get on board with being a part of that kind of link between that in-person church life and this digital connecting piece, because they get it, they get the big picture, they're ready to think outside the box a little bit, and they're not going to be the ones that, start chatting in the middle of a live stream worship with, I hope to see you in person next week, because you're going to just negate that invitation that you've given for them to be present fully in the way that they can be at that point. So think about that. The other thing that I want you to think about is we are going to talk about a whole lot of areas. The idea is to flood you with ideas so that you can narrow down what works best in your context. And so this is a quality over quantity decision, right? I encourage you to explore one aspect of that you could enhance or add to the digital presence and virtual opportunities that you have, rather than think we've got to do all of these things all at once, because that is going to spread you too thin and it's not going to be done well. And the people who are engaging virtually already have an easy way to just fall away. And so we want to do what we do well. And if that means that you pick the one thing that works the best right now, and then you add when you perfected to, as much as we can be perfect to that degree, and then you look at the next piece, that is better than doing things halfway in 10 different directions and it not feel invitational or complete to those who are experiencing it. So with that said, let's talk about some online worship pieces. Many of you already have online worship pieces. That's part of why you're in this cohort, or that you're already doing some type of online presence for worship. There are some really important things that if you're not already doing as a part of worship, to engage those who plan to join you virtually, either regularly or just, because they're out of town or they're sick, to make sure that they feel just as included online as those who are in person. Some of that can even be in the prep that goes ahead of time. They get an email the day or two before worship. We're looking forward to seeing you. Here are the times that you could join us in person. Here's the times you could join us virtually. Here's the giving opportunities if you want to go ahead and have access to that. Here's the link to the scriptures that we're going to be sharing if you want to go ahead and have that ready for you to read together. For those of you, if you're doing, if you have songs that you are not able to do the words listed to where, on the screen that someone is watching, not necessarily like watching the screens from afar through a video, I would highly recommend that you start listing the song lyrics and invite, and even acknowledge, like, it's kind of weird to sing to yourself in the middle of the living room by yourself or with your family, or as your kids are screaming in the other room because they're sick or whatever. And so acknowledge, like, you might not feel comfortable singing out loud, but we do want you to be able to read the words as we sing with you. And acknowledge that this is a different experience, not just that here's all the stuff that you're going to be watching us do. It's here's your ways to connect to the pieces, but send it ahead of time so that they are ready and can prepare themselves for that. In every listing that, when you list your worship times, if you regularly offer a way to watch and be present in a worship service virtually, then it needs to be listed along with every other time. And the same time, the same way that it's listed, so if it's a 9:00 in the, Wesley Hall, 11:00 sanctuary, 9:00 online at this site, that should just be a part of your regular marketing, because it needs to be seen as, this is not a less service. I am not less than if I choose to watch, because that is a hospitality piece. And so if you are welcoming them in a way where they feel included from the get-go, there's a much better chance that at some point they're going to engage more deeply later on. But making me feel, for example, the phrasing, we'd love for you to join you in person, but if you're not able, here is, that implies that I'm making a choice that is less than. And so watch your wording. Be careful of how that invitation comes through. Again, some of it is worship, but some of it is hospitality. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I have read the quote over the last 6 months and all the reading that I've done to make sure that I have a good understanding of how this transition in ministry framing works for me. The phrase discipleship always begins with hospitality. The invitation has to be present and feel good and comfortable for us to invite them into the next piece of discipleship, into the next step, into that deeper relationship with Christ, and the want to be a part of the bigger life of the church. And so, again, while we would rather everyone have their butts in the seat, we also have to recognize that we are not in the place where that demand can translate to a hospitable way sometimes. And so getting to where we are making that first step of invitation in the most hospitable way of saying, this is all of your options, pick one, instead of, well, if you can't do these two that we prefer, then you can do this. That changes the invitation from the get-go, just in a few simple words, or maybe not, a few simple elimination of words. Think about how those pre-emails go and the intention behind, when they go out. And so I know Pulaski Heights does a great job of sending an email about an hour before the service starts that just kind of is a reminder of, hey, we'd love to see you. It has the link to any of the worship pieces. And it has a clear way that I can go download if my kids, if we're not going to be there in person, that I can download the children's worship bulletin so that my kids still have the same kind of thing they're used to when they're in person. So all of those pieces that exist, whatever exists for you in an in-person service, should be accessible in some way. Doesn't have to look the exact same, but in some way, in a digital form, if you're inviting them to worship online as well. Now, for those of you who record and then you post it later because it's not a live experience, I think you can do the same thing, but you make sure that however you send that invitation out, you include those things to follow along. Here is our 9:00 service. For those of you who are not able to join us, here's the opportunity to watch. Here are the links so that it's easily, everything is easily accessible for you to follow along. So it's still invitational in the sense that You have access to all the same information, all the words, all of the interactive pieces that we were a part of that you'll see, and we want you to do that too. And so it's part of that is just the inclusion piece, making sure that at no point in a service are you referring to something that someone who's watching either live or later can't see. If you're showing a picture, if you're reading a book to the kids, I hope that you will there's some copyright issues there. So, taking pictures of things, but like even a link to, a lot of times you can you can search on YouTube the reading of a book. If you use a children's story or you use some type of simple piece, and you can link to someone reads it out loud with pictures. So just being mindful of anything that's going to happen in person. How does that translate to the person on the other side of the screen? Can you see it? Can you hear it the same? Can you, if you ask a question for, sit down, with your neighbor in the middle of a sermon and tell me, 3 things that you're excited about this week. Make sure that you have someone that's ready to receive those answers from those online. And so if it's live, that means that you have that person that is on board with these folks being at home and excited about them being present. And they are live and they have a computer on their lap in the pew that they're answering, or their phone or whatever. And they are the greeter assigned to the online group, basically. It's like an added piece to that greeting hospitality system. And so they're asking the same question. If something is said out loud, if you have time, for example, where prayer concerns are shared out loud and they're not mic'd, that should be shared in the chat. So, so-and-so's name was lifted up, things like that, so that they are included in every piece of that. If it is recorded and after, you have to take a little bit of time for someone to go back and kind of add those pieces in. Prayer concerns that were listed today. Please respond to this email with any prayer concerns you would like us to include this week, along with these for the as our pastor or our staff or our prayer team prays for those that were shared in Sunday school. Anything that adds the extra step of inclusion is the first aspect of feeling like, oh, it's okay if I just watched today, because they didn't actually just watch. They answered an email, they answered a question, they responded to something. And so you have another engaged congregation member. Okay, before we move forward, anything on any of that?
Hey, Amy? Michelle, I was gonna thank you for that. So well said, and so important to consider. And I wanted to just remind you all, before I see everybody taking notes, before you let this overwhelm you, remember what Michelle Morris, Dr. Morris, shared with us the last time we were together, that this does not have to be you. Right. This is your ministry team. This is people who commit to do this for a month at a time, or a quarter at a time, or however it is that you deem necessary. But when we allow others and bring others into the conversation and into the online discipleship pathway for folks, we are doing a really good job. So don't take this and go, oh my gosh, I can't do this. It's too much. I can't do this. No, of course you can't, but we can do this with a ministry team. We can do this together. So anyway, just wanted to add that. Thank you, Michelle.
Absolutely. And a part of that pre-email or preparation, you could form that ahead of time through social media and other like church-wide emails of, as you prepare for worship this Sunday, be thinking about this question. And so that puts everybody on the same playing field, right? Like you're thinking about the same question that you're going to hear discussed either in the sermon or through the scripture or in a combination of all those pieces. But when I get to either in-person worship or online, we've all been considering the same thing, right? Or, also say, things like, hey, it's Communion Sunday. For those of you who are going to be worshiping with us online, here are some ways that you can engage with that. And every church has a different way to do that. I know Love Feast is one way that we handled it during COVID kind of piece. Some people had communion ready to pick up that was blessed and ready to partake on Sunday. So if you have folks that are in the community but watching, and that's something that you could add to a volunteer to deliver communion elements and be ready, that is different in every context, and you've got to figure out what that looks like for them. But for them to be able to not get to the place where everyone else is in line and getting communion, and you're sitting in the couch going, oh, that feels like I'm not, participating. Keep that in mind. I don't know that you want to, you don't create that as like your common thing, because communion is a little different, right? Like there's a reason behind that. And so if that means that, you go along the shut-in kind of line, if they're local, that you bring them communion later, so that they're a part of that. There's some differences in how every congregation and clergy person is going to handle that. But it's something to think through in terms of, how can we show that we thought about you beforehand? How can we show that there was an intentional conversation around how to include you? Even if it ends with, we're going to have to bring this to you later, but there was intentionality behind the thought, instead of, oh crap, we forgot that might not be able to translate, right? Those two are way different feelings created from the get-go. The last thing for the worship piece that again is all kind of translates into that hospitality piece is making sure that you have a clear plan for follow-up with those who participate online. So in the same way that you have an attendance pad and you follow up, and if whether they get a coffee cup after the end of service, if they're a new person, or a loaf of bread, or whatever that looks like. What is a similar way that you follow up? It doesn't have to be the exact same. This is not we have to replicate everything that is done. But there needs to be a plan for when someone engages online, especially if, they're a visitor, who's kind of checking things out. What does that engagement look like? Is that a phone call? If they're local, is that dropping off the coffee cup that they would have gotten? Or is that, if they're a couple of hours away, but they found you and it meshes the best, does that mean that you're mailing them a note with either the coffee cup or something that's a little bit easier to mail, that's related and says, our visitors receive a gift when you first join us, and we're so glad that you joined us, please accept this. I mean, to acknowledge they are one of those who came and who were new, and a new face. And so this is what happens if you walk in our doors, and this is what happens when you walk on our computer, those kind of pieces. So that we're going to transfer into hospitality. A lot of that is hospitality in itself. And again, that whole, that sentence of discipleship starts with hospitality. And so some of this, it all kind of overlaps, but if we were going to categorize, also thinking in terms of how do you tell people that you exist, right? And Amy covered a lot of this in the last 2 weeks, about kind of your presence and that website and social media presence. It has got to be up to date. It does not have to be just beautiful and the most, elaborate web page you've ever had, but it does have to have accurate information. And if that means that you just have one page that says where the church is located, who can I call, where's the number that I can call, or an email that I can send that is going to get returned in a timely manner to ask questions. And here are the basic times that you need to know for anything that someone who is looking for a place to plug in can find easily. The rule of thumb now, and my soon-to-be 12-year-old and I've had this conversation, is that one of his teachers was talking about how he was learning how to write for a web page, which still blows my mind that is part of his class right now. But one of the things that she said is you should be placing any information that someone would Google before wanting to talk to a person on that page. The goal in most people's I would say under at least 35, maybe a little bit more. I don't know, maybe everybody at this point, because we're just done with people. The goal is to not talk to people, right? Like we have this newfound kind of like obsession with, let me see how many different ways that I can go about getting information without actually having to pick up the phone and talk on the phone. Like if I can send a text message, great. If I can send an email, fantastic. If I can respond to your phone call with an email, even better, right? So think about that, in that if you have a situation in which you've created a place where they can't get all the information, basic information that they would need before they walk in the doors, they're probably not going to walk in your doors. They're going to go find a place that makes it easier for that to happen. That also includes information that is the more implied information than the standard. So, for example, one of the things that people will wonder about is, I wonder how dressy this church is. So include in your webpage or your social media, hey, you're going to see jeans. It's okay. Come dressed as you are. And when you say come as you are, that implies that the people that they see when they walk in are really going to be as come as they are. If your congregation dresses in church clothes and dressier clothes, and you say on your website, casual's fine, and they walk in jeans, you have created an environment already that seems where they are not on the same level. So be honest about it. If it is church, if it is church dressy attire, if it is business casual, if it is whatever you need to call it, be honest about what that is, because that is way more, that makes you feel way more comfortable going into a situation than if you're just trying to be nice and you've created something uncomfortable from the get-go. Does that make sense? And that can be on your social media. That could be part of your pre-email that goes out every time. That could go out. That can be on your social media that says, hey, we're going to be talking about this scripture. I would invite you to think about this question. Don't forget, we have these services. This service, blue jeans, you'll see anything and everything from shorts to dresses. And this one, you might see more dresses. I mean, it is perfectly fine to be very open and honest. People want authentic communication. And so by doing that, that's how you create that authenticity. And people will appreciate that way more, even if it means they have to go put on a dress, or that they choose a different service to go to so that they don't have to put on a dress, or whatever the translating is for boys. Like, I guess that's like hard pants for my husband instead of his casual.
Or
I don't know.
Suits.
Suits.
Lots of 11 o'clock worship services. Everyone who is ushering or greeting are in suits and dresses.
Right. And that needs to be, honest. And if you don't want to put it in words, you could take pictures, and people use pictures as visual clues really well. So if you want to be more subtle, you could take some pictures of those in your service, not weird, just, cheesing, but general pictures of people worshiping in your different settings. Place them strategically as you're naming out your time so that they know what service you're in. And then people can draw their own conclusions and see. Just make sure that the pictures accurately depict those, don't pick the one person who wore shorts among all the suits, because, just be accurate. Okay, another piece of this is kind of along the same lines as that we talked about with worship, is if you are going to offer any type of next step, so that hospitable, you've joined us in worship, we want to give you some other way to engage. We want to give you online Bible studies. We want to give you any kind of faith formation piece, whether that's a Sunday school class, whether that is a Bible study, whether it is, a 6-week parenting class, whatever. You have to ask yourself questions around, and this goes back to that quality over quantity piece, right? So can you do this well in a hybrid setting? And that means that anybody that attends online is fully able to be included in the conversation. That means they can hear everything. They can see any slides that are offered. They can hear everybody because it's more discussion based. All of those pieces, they could easily raise their hand and interject in a conversation. If that can't be the case, then what does it look like for us to offer an in-person opportunity and an online opportunity so that it is fully engaged online and you're in a Zoom setting to where everybody is on the same kind of medium? And there's not a right or wrong. It's just when you're planning out those opportunities that you're going to offer, your question is, can the people on the computer and the people in person participate in the exact same way? And again, we recognize that it's okay to be different. It is not okay to not include, right? Like the presence can look different. But if they don't have the same opportunities that that person sitting at the table does, then we have to rethink how we offer that. That also could be offering opportunities where, you know, you offer 3 different locations so that everybody's not in the same room with one person on the computer, but you have 3 or 4, you know, joining with a computer in one room, and you have 3 or 4 at a house in another. And so it kind of evens out a little bit, where those people who need that in-person interaction have it, but they also have more than 1 or 2 people to participate in that computer setting. So we've also seen it to where, you know, people can sit in the room together, but they have an iPad or a phone or a computer in front of them, so that you're seeing squares, even if multiple people are in the same room. And so there's still an engagement of what that looks like. Amy?
Thank you so much for bringing this up, because I love to tell the story of Mrs. Betty Babb, who is in her 80s, attends Lakeside United Methodist Church in Pine Bluff. She sits on like the probably the 5th to the last row on the end, and she has her iPad, and she is in charge of the chat every Sunday during worship. And that is her job, and that's what she does. And she turns the volume down so that she can hear what's going on in front of her, but she is in tune to everyone who is worshiping online, and she greets every single person and takes prayer requests. And so don't think that this has to be a millennial or a Gen Zer, you know. Anybody can do this. Anybody can do this. And I love to promote Mrs. Betty Babb anytime I get a chance. So thanks.
I was catching up on the chat while you were talking, and I think most of your answers have been, most of your questions have been answered. I do want to point out that that one of the more intentional things that I have noticed at my home church is that if you have folks that are watching online, there is clear invitation when an engagement when the pastor turns to the camera and speaks to that camera. So their full face is talking to me or talking to whoever is on that. And they intentionally say multiple times during the service, "We're so excited for you to join us, for those of you who are here in person, for those of you who are joining us online," and you look at the camera, "For those of you." And so again, it's that participatory thing where any opportunity you have to acknowledge them, those who are on the computer or their phone, that you know that they're present. And that's, I think Nan maybe asked that question I think that's where you could say, you know, while those, like, we've invited those who are sitting here to fill out their attendance pad, while they're doing that, if you'll please, you know, pop your name and your email in there so we can follow up with you with information. You know, it's kind of that, it's the same invitation because you're asking those people in the seats, you know, to write something down. And so you're doing the same thing for that. If you want to make it less public, you could easily have like a Google form created where you put that link in so that they could fill in the Google form. So you get their information, but not everybody watching online gets their email address. And so you can easily handle it that way. If you already have an online system of how you collect information from folks in person, you just share that link. But you could easily create that without it like costing any money on a Google form. Amy?
I'm sorry. One more thing. I was going to say, you know, a great way to set the, Nan talked about, you know, how do you create this culture? And it is something that you have to build. If your people are not used to engaging, if they are not used to it, it is a culture you have to create. And a great way, on top of what Michelle was sharing about her home church and how they do some things. I saw not too long ago how the person who was managing the chat at the beginning of the service introduced themselves in the chat. They said, "Hi, good morning. I'm so glad that you're here. My name is so-and-so, and I am the your online hospitality person, whatever it is you want to call it. I will be, just like you would if it was in real person. That's what Michelle is pointing towards. And that's what I have mentioned before, a people first mentality of make this as you would if someone walked in the front door. Hi, my name is Elizabeth, or, hey. So anyway, just wanted to share that. Thanks.
George, I saw that you unmuted. Did you have a question?
Yeah, just thank you. Kind of address it, and this may be way out of line, but going back.
Oh,
sorry. Yeah, Betty does a wonderful job of that at Lakeside, and I will pass that along to her. But, one of the things we found, and there's not an answer to this, but have to ask it. We know that we have more people viewing than will put things in the chat. And I know some people are just not going to do that. They're not comfortable. But at the same time, how do you let those people know that, hey, you're welcome, we love you, and we're glad you're here, if they're not going to give us their name? I mean, it goes back to the old deal of leading a horse to water, but
right.
Can't make him drink. Anybody have that problem or a solution for it or idea for it?
We also, in addition to having like the chat, we put a link to our like kind of online sign up. We have an online option for people if they want to fill it out with their phone in person, or if they're, if they're online. But that way too, because that may seem less like personal and a little more anonymous, like some people might like, instead of, if they want to be more of a watcher, right? So we get a lot of those. And we also have we found a like a text message option where you can just like text that you're here today. Anyway, that's like kind of easy and sort of anonymous, I think, because we found success with.
Yeah. We do that too. We offer an online registration and we encourage people to sign it. I can just about tell you before I look at the list who's going to sign it. It's that same 4, 5, 6, 10 people, whatever it is. It's the same ones every week. But you just got to keep trying.
And some of that is the consistency. So it's allowing people to start feeling comfortable. And at some point, there's a good chance that if you're continuing to be hospitable consistently, and they know what to expect, and they know that they're welcome every time, that it wasn't like a one-off, right? Then something's going to click. And whether that is the next online piece that you offer, if there's, hey, we're going to have a fully online small group meet over coffee on Tuesdays, that might be the next step, because it's not the invitation to necessarily step into something in person. Because I'm going to guess that the people who want to remain kind of anonymous and don't even want to give you their information are not going to be the ones who walk up in the church all of a sudden. But that might be where that next intentional step is around the evangelism side of things. Once you kind of connect, then what's your next piece that you're inviting to? And that might look like setting up an intentional, only small group that's checking in for the next 3 weeks on a Wednesday morning. Bring your coffee, here's the Zoom link. And that might mean that you put that in the chat for a few weeks to say, hey, we're having an online gathering. You don't have to prepare for it. It's just a check-in. If you just, want to check in, you could come for, one, like a very, like next step, that it's one step beyond worship, but you're not asking them to commit to anything. You're not roping them into reading a book or, to be prepared. It's that kind of just, let's do one more thing. Because then if they get on a Zoom and you see their face, it's a whole lot easier to say, well, my name's George. What is your name? And so thinking about what that looks like for your specific context as a next step invitation.
We've kind of taken that, used to worry about it, but kind of taking that attitude. It's really no different than that person who's there in person, but is just shy and not going to join in, but they're going to be there. So that's kind of
and the other way to frame that is still probably someone who wouldn't ever show up in person, and that they are still engaging in worship in some way. Right. And if we have provided an opportunity for someone to engage in worship, even in a very disconnected, way, it's probably way more than they were able to do in person. And so sometimes we just have to count a win for a win, what it is, and meet people where they are. So, Nan, you have something?
During COVID, I invited everybody that was watching every week to comment or say something, and it was rare. It was rare. When we stopped, when COVID ended and we were back live in the church, I got more responses, but I was not preaching from the church because there was no internet in Biometer. Mm-hmm. There was no internet and it wasn't going to happen. So I was recording and uploading, and I got more comments when they were recorded. I don't know if they knew it was recorded and thought, well, this is safe, I can make a comment, nobody's going to say anything to me. And I still get comments from old videos that are still on Biometa's Facebook page. I think they're trying to remove them, but I don't know if they've gotten them all, because that was over 2 years worth. So, but it's not been consistent in my new church in Brinkley for me to be in the habit. I've done it several times, but I haven't done it consistently. So this is a good reminder to do that, and to have our liturgist, when she welcomes everyone, to welcome everyone online, watching and or listening, as well as my calling attention to it as during the service.
And if you have someone that is doing some, the intentional work when it's live and kind of in charge, you might make sure that you either say that out loud, or that that greeter, that online greeter is very intentional about saying that, because there's also a fear that you're going to interrupt the pastor, right? Like, what if the phone is right here and you're seeing these, hearts and likes floating all over the place? It's distracting, right? And I mean, it's distracting when you're listening to it and you see them continue to float. So I can't even imagine if I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I don't want her to see that while it's popping, like she's going to get off track. So you might also invite them to recognize that, you can't wait to see who joined them today, but for right now, Patrick's going to take care of that kind of thing. There's just kind of a reminder of like, you're not going to phase me. Y'all just get over there and chat. It's the same way that you say, like, we love crying babies. That means the church is alive. You're not, I'm not going to be interrupted by a crying baby. It's that same invitation of, don't try to be quiet for my sake. But you just say it in a different way of what that invitation looks like, so that they're clear that it's perfectly fine for them to interact that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to add one more thing. Just a tidbit. Blytheville First United Methodist Church, which is where our conference lay leader, Kathy Conley, attends. I love the fact that they have a script that is, they've taped it, or it just is a piece that stays on the lectern for the liturgist every Sunday, so that the liturgist knows to look into the camera and say, welcome to everyone who is here today, and especially to our friends who are joining us who can't be in the building. We are so glad that you are here. It is, and they have a script, and that's how they start out, and it is right there, and it serves as a reminder for everybody who steps into that liturgist pulpit. And anyway, great idea that sometimes we just forget that, a simple piece of paper just reminding us, this is what you say. Yeah. Okay.
So the last piece on hospitality, and this is something that we could spend a whole hour and a half on it on its own. And the more I have sat with this sentence, the more I think that maybe Amy and I might work on the next piece. But I read yesterday, when I was kind of going over my notes, I read this line that kept sticking out that says, online hospitality can easily look like equipping existing disciples to engage online with civility. How would Jesus respond? And that has sat with me in multiple ways. We all know that the internet is awful, right? Like social media is just horrible. And while we know that it's also the tool that we use to reach people, we also know that there is a chance that the same people who might be your online greeter and saying hello might also be spewing all sorts of stuff on Monday morning, right? I mean, it's the same concept as like all the people who went to church and sat in the pew and then they go and, it's that, what's that whole saying about Sundays are the worst for tips at restaurants, that kind of comment, that kind of culture of we try really hard to make sure that people represent our church well. Like I can't tell you the number of times that I've had a pastor make comments like, I don't want to make bumper stickers because I don't want people to know that the people flipping them off and cutting them off are the same people that belong to this church. And so in that mentality, the same thing of like, how do we represent? And I really wonder about what does it look like when we do some intentional work about teaching civility as hospitality and not just because you're supposed to behave, right? Like this is a form of hospitality and therefore discipleship when we learn how to have healthy conversations around disagreement. And some of that translates to like our whole culture of the United Methodist Church right now. But I think it even more hit me with the online piece of if you're creating this culture around an online presence completely, what does that look like and translate in a discipleship way? Anyway, like I said, we could talk about that for a whole hour and a half in itself, but I just wanted to say it out loud because I'm a little fixated on that concept right now, and it's spinning in my head. Okay, quickly, I'm going to go through some of these because some of it we've already kind of talked about, and then some of it is more making sure that some resources are available for you. One of the greatest things that you could do for your congregation in general is to help them understand the concept of spiritual gifts and how that looks. Creating this environment for your in-person folks and your online folks to recognize that everyone has spiritual gifts, and there are ways for every person to share the spiritual gifts with their congregation and with their community beyond. And so if you're going to have, some intentional, a sermon series around spiritual gifts, there are online tools that you could share easily in the chat. You could share in that pre-worship email of, hey, we're going to be talking about spiritual gifts. Go ahead and be thinking about this. Here is an online assessment. And I included the tool that is an online assessment for spiritual gifts through Discipleship Ministries. And there are many tools like that. So if you're going to talk about any kind of thing, if you're going to invite them at any point as a congregation to explore their gifts or to explore, whatever, there is usually some kind of online tool. And if it doesn't exist, you can make it exist in a Google form for free. But if there's any point at which you're going to ask your congregation to do some type of assessment or evaluation, make sure you have a way for that to be included in the online sense. Spiritual gifts are a great way because then you get to translate with, then what is the invitation that comes from that? So I have the spiritual gift of, I don't know, whatever. It's not coming to my head. What is it? Organization, order. There's a word for it. I know y'all are all super shocked by that. And so for me, I have, I get invited a lot to be a part of the things that order pieces of the church, right? Not order worship, because that is not what I'm called to, but I order a lot of other things. And so when that's identified, we see that. So what happens when someone who is fully online recognizes, like, I really like XYZ, then we go find them something that they can do, whether that's pick it up from the church office and do it at home and bring it back and drop it off because they participated in that way. Or that's because they've been, they've found that they're, they want to be the part of the hospitality team for the online folks. Like, what happens when we turn our in-person greeter into one of the folks that's online and they are the greeter? So that's that next question of, how do we invite them into the next step? They don't necessarily ever have to show up, right? Like, we meet them where they are, but we also keep inviting them into that service piece. It's that ING that we talked about at the very beginning of a disciple. Like, every description of a disciple has some type of ING word, right? It is a continuous process. It is carrying forward. It does not end. It does not check off. It does not mean that you just watch online and then you're done. It means that the next few, after you're comfortable and we've engaged with you some, then we say, you know what, I've noticed that you are great at responding to these. I would love for you to step in one Sunday when our greeter is going to be out of town and just run this chat for us. Would you mind taking care of that for us? Giving them opportunities to meet them where they're at, but also engage them into that service. Moving into evangelism and faith formation, a lot of this we already talked about in the hospitality, because I said, it rolls all together. This is where you use your mission insight information that Amy's been helping you figure out those community pieces. This is also where, if you're not familiar with Fresh Expressions, a lot of the ideas from Fresh Expressions can help you form some ideas of how to move forward in this. And it doesn't mean that you need to start a fresh expression, right? So Fresh Expressions, like one of the ways that they collect their information and get ideas for what they could start next in the community is they filter on Facebook through the groups in their community. So they go to public groups and they just start looking through, and what are the common groups in this community? What's unique to this community? Is it that we have a whole lot of groups that are about moms and stay-at-home moms or single moms or whatever, and then you realize there's 10 groups for parents who are looking to connect with one another. What could our church do to offer that language? And if they're already online, then you start with an online engagement, and then you invite them into, hey, if you just need a space where you can bring your kids every Tuesday from 10 to 12 and just get together and have this open gym space for them to play, you're more than welcome to that. And then a couple of weeks later, somebody shows up and says, if y'all would like me just to be here, if anybody, just needs to be prayed with, because parenthood is hard, I'm here to pray with you. You didn't necessarily start anything brand new. You didn't create a whole new something, but you recognized what was in your community because of an online platform. And then you met them where they were, and then you kept forming invitations. This does not have to be you don't have to go find, the coolest, hippiest, place to connect with folks who are unchurched. If you have that, great. If you have that capability, but part of this is just using the online forums that people are already using to connect with one another and adding a place where the church can connect to that. And generally, that does not mean that you walk up into those groups and go, hey, come to church on Sunday. Right? It's you get them comfortable with your faces and then your spaces. Part of this is also using social media for discipleship and not advertising. So, and Amy talked a little bit about this at the very beginning, about how your posts do not always need to be, hey, don't forget to sign up for this. Hey, don't forget it. Some of your posts should consist of just generalized, what can we pray for you this week for? Or, hey, I'm working on a sermon, and this is the question. I see a lot of those, and I think that the way that people engage with those are hilarious to me, because some of the answers I would never have expected, and it's fun to watch those interactions when pastors do crowdsourcing for sermons. But I think it's fun for that interaction to happen on a Wednesday before you ever get to hear what it comes out as a Sunday. Like, what a better way I gave an answer, I want to hear how it's used on Sunday, right? So engage and ask some discipleship questions. What are you most excited about for this fall season? How can you engage with that? If you get the same answer 10 times on what do you most look forward to than fall, then you might be tapping into some way that you can help engage that further, right? I'm excited about, I don't know, like apple cider, or I'm excited about fall temperatures. So when it actually is not 500 degrees outside in September, maybe you say, you know what, we're going to enjoy the fact that it's finally fall and we're going to have church outside today. What a way to engage with folks who are saying, this is exciting to me, but then recognize that that's a way that you can do that as a community and be excited about cold weather together. And it doesn't cost you anything. You got to just translate it outside a little bit, which is kind of a pain in its own right, but we can do that, right? Like we did that forever, socially distanced. And we do it on Easter morning. So, so think about, just some simple ways that kind of add just a difference. And also, if you're going to ask a question on social media, make sure that you're engaging back, or whoever is asking that question is engaging back. You can't just put a question out there and then let it go. You've got to engage. Facebook also really appreciates that, and Instagram. If you don't engage back to your people, they'll stop showing it to your people. And then the other piece of that is making sure that if you're asking for legitimate ideas or suggestions, figure out a way that those are engaged, or that you answer with, oh, that's a great idea, I'm going to add that to next spring's list or whatever. But answer them with, I see this and I hear you. Because if they answer a couple of those and they never see where it comes from, where it goes, they're going to stop answering you because they're not being heard. So don't create a situation in which people are going to get frustrated. One of the examples that I keep seeing is the pet blessings that are coming up with, many of our churches. And I think this is a perfect way to ask the question, how does our online community engage in a way that they're included to? Does that mean that they should bring, they could bring their pet? Maybe that's what gets them out of the house. Because I'm going to tell you, people will do a lot of things for pets they won't do for anybody else. And so maybe that is the way that you're intentional. And in, leading up to your pet blessing, you're really intentional about sending that invitation in the chat for worship to say, we would love to see you here. If you can't be here in person, please email so-and-so with a picture of your pet. We will bless that pet from afar, making sure that they recognize that they are invited to be as included as everyone else and figure out what that looks like for them, right? Or if that's an invitation to, we're going to make visits over the next few weeks for those whose pet can't get out, and we'll come to your house and bless them, making sure that people are included in all of those pieces. And those right there are the ones that somebody will pass along and be like, hey, Susie, I know you can't bring that horse, but that horse needs a blessing. And so you should call so-and-so. And that's an easy way to say on a social media post, if you know someone who loves their pet and wants them blessed, but can't be here in person, please pass their information along, and we'd be happy to, please pass our information along. And if they, we're happy to set up a time or whatever. That's a great invitational tool that your congregation's members do for you instead of you doing the work of trying to find some folks, right? Okay, I mentioned the Fresh Expressions. I put that book, one of those books, in the chat. And again, you're going to read it and go, half of this does not apply, and that is totally fine. But there are some really good ways early in those chapters, in the early chapters, that talk about identifying the needs of a community before they ever get to the next steps of that. And so it might not all apply in terms of starting a fresh expression from start to finish, but I think any church could find some really interesting ideas for how to make sure that you're assessing the needs of your community. There's also a book in there by Priscilla Pope Levison out of SMU. It's called Models of Evangelism. It does not concentrate on online evangelism. It gives you 8 models of evangelism. And there's 2 reasons I love that book. One is, like we talked about at the very beginning, I think evangelism is seen as a very churchy, almost scary word to most. And so it gives some great practical ways to explain evangelism to folks who are not church folk, or who are not clergy and don't see themselves as church folk, even if they are church folk, to explain what evangelism is and kind of examples. And it gives some really great ways to kind of break down, here are 8 ways that we can evangelize. Let's find a couple of ways that fit us best. It would be a great study for a leadership team to be able to kind of say, what is this like, looking at our community, what does this look like for us? And it talks about, like, tent revivals might work really well as an evangelism tool in some communities. It's not going to work in all of them. So it might work on door to door, like, hey, what do you need? But there's some great examples in there for church work in general, but some of those pieces could be easily applied to that online aspect. I'm going to wrap up. And so most of what I'm about to say is just look at the resource list. But that online children's, online youth, and online young adult groups. The biggest reminder that I will give you is that because a lot of those interact with underage kids or people, it means that you need to be clear on what safe gatherings, either if you have a safe gatherings or risk management policy of any kind, what your policy is for engaging with children and youth online. So if you're having Zoom meetings with some or whatever, or if you do text groups or you're, whatever, making sure that you have a policy and that it's in place. St. James United Methodist in Little Rock has a great media policy, like a digital, they just have a whole section of their safe gatherings policy is a digital media policy. And it's great about, that you have to have two adults engaged, in a conversation if you're going to have a group of teenagers and a group and things like that. So I'm happy to pass that along if you'll email me. Amy, will you put my email in the chat? And then making sure that, you're following those policies. You should never be texting one-on-one with kids. And then the other piece of that is using the tools that they already use. So youth especially will disengage faster than anything else if you say, oh, here's a new app I want you to use. They want to lead the charge. They have particular things. They move on to apps faster than the rest of us anyway. But meet them where they are. So if the majority, and this varies in every community. So rural communities tend to hang on to current social media trends a little bit longer and don't switch over to newer ones as quickly. And so some of your, if you're in a rural setting, you might still have people that mostly use Instagram and Snapchat and things like that. I'm not a big, I'm not a fan of adults and teenagers with Snapchat, period. And we can talk about that later if you want my whole spiel. But Instagram, you could have a group on there. You could have a text group, things like that. And it's things like sending praying for you this morning, or every Sunday night, what does everybody need prayers for this week? And let them all respond. I have a math test. I have this practice. I have this game, and then checking in with them. And that doesn't need to be you. If you have a youth leader that's designated as that, great. Or it's 2 or 3 congregation members who just have a passion for making sure that the teenagers in the congregation are seen and heard and cared for, and they're a part of that group, and they just check in with them regularly. And then let's see, making sure that anything that is for a specific age group in worship is also included in those worship emails or those links. So children's bulletins, or if you have, if you have something that you're going to say, use your 2 pipe cleaners in your children's bag to make blah, 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 then you need to make sure in that pre-email that goes out 2 or 3 days before, hey, parents, FYI, one of the activities includes using pipe cleaners. If you don't have any, we have an extra basket out on the front desk at the church. You're more than welcome to run by and grab some before Sunday so that your kid's included. Acknowledging that they're going to need something that they don't want to have to go find and dig out of the craft closet, in the middle of the service, and B, that they might not have that on hand and it shouldn't cost them a trip to Walmart to do. And we have a way for you to have this. Outside of that, we are finding that young adults are really enjoying across the conference connecting over a book. They meet once a month together to just talk about a chapter in a book and connect with one another. They meet on 8 o'clock on Sunday nights once a month. And they're from all over the country because they're Arkansas folks, but they're at schools or, whatever else. And so we have one that's in law school in North Carolina. We have one that's in seminary in Washington, D.C. We have a few in state. And so if you have young adults who would be engaged in that, I'm happy to connect them. But it's also something that you could explore too, of what does it look like to give young adults something in particular to latch onto that doesn't look like what they did as youth. If they're off at school, but they still want to have a connecting piece back, what does that look like to invite them back into an online only kind of study? Most everything else that I have talked about especially for children and youth, that didn't get covered is in discipleship PDFs from discipleship ministries on how to create a discipleship plan for children, for youth, for young adults. All of those pieces are on that resource page. Okay, let's see. Or not. Okay. Gail, did you get that now?
Is that what Michael sent?
Yes. I think okay. I might have shared it before you got in, so it didn't show up.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Michael. Yeah.
What steps should be taken to avoid first-time visitors being overwhelmed by well-meaning congregants? Any ideas for that? How do y'all keep people in check from being like the overeager dogs that are like, oh my gosh, you're here. Which is exciting that they're so happy, but also like, calm down.
I think you got to have a plan. I think you got to have a plan beforehand. That hospitality team is wonderful, and there needs to be a plan. Now, people in the pews who are going to turn around and ask, now, where did you come from, and who are your people, and all of that. I don't know that we can do a whole lot about that. And, you hate to ask people to tone it down in the pew. I think with your greeting team, you can be very strategic there and make sure, because those are going to be the first faces and voices potentially that they hear, whether you've got greeters in the parking lot or you've got greeters that are waiting inside, which I'm a huge proponent for. Let's greet people as they come to the parking lot and not just as they come in the door, because it's really scary to walk in the door of a place that has no windows that you can't see in and you've never been there before. So anyway, just my 2 cents there. But work with your hospitality team, meet with your hospitality team, strategize together. How is the best way for us to greet people that we might not know? Because it might not necessarily be someone new. And that's the worst, is that you greet someone like they're new and they're really not. But to be casual, to be friendly, to not be overly anything. And I think that, is going to be contextual. If you are a metro church, if you're a rural church, if you're a church out in the middle of the country versus a church right in the middle of downtown, I think it's you can argue with me, but I think it's going to be contextual in how you greet new folks and how you greet other folks who have maybe visited once or twice before. But I would suggest creating a plan beforehand and getting input from everyone, not just coming at everybody like, okay, this is how you need to do it.
So 3 things that made me think of that. One is, and this is not an online tool, but this is just from a person who doesn't like to shake hands. I love it when, if there is a meet and greet, a pass the peace moment in service, that the invitation is said, greet the person next to you either with a handshake or a wave. I love the permission to not be the standoff person. I mean, I'm going to be it anyway, but it's nice when from the pulpit it said it's okay to wave. And so thinking about the language around that for those who are not comfortable, especially if you just walked into a place, then all of a sudden you're like forced to touch other people. I love it when greeters are trained to help find folks' seats together, especially if they come in a little bit late, and kind of assessing, oh, there's 4 seats up here, let me walk you. Because when you are walked by someone who knows where they're going, it doesn't feel like you're interrupting the service. But when you're kind of having to peek around and see where there are seats, it feels intimidating. And so training your greeters to do an assessment for, I got 2 seats here, I got 4 seats here, I'm going to walk you to those seats, not just point you to them, is very helpful. And then I had a third and I forgot what it was. So. Let's see, there was one other question. How do you motivate church members to also participate in home church Bible study after participating in continuing online studies? One of those, I think you could, I mean, if you are in a place where you have a relationship where you could ask the question of saying, I love that you have found a place with that. Is there a study in particular that you've done that you really enjoyed that you could help lead here, or co-lead, or lead with me, or bring back, like put it kind of back on them in the sense of, A, I know that you're going to these, and so you obviously enjoy it, and B, let's bring that leadership back here, or turn it around with, who are some people here in the congregation that you think would enjoy a similar type? Can you help me invite those folks in? And so kind of put them in some leadership places of that, to say, I would love for you to bring what you've enjoyed so much there into this space, whether it's through leading the actual study, or if it's the invitation of kind of organizing the study of Can you help me name 5 people? Would you be willing to call those 5 and I'll call these 5 to invite them into I think part of that is kind of putting it back on them to say, help me do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And ask them specifically. I mean, set a time. Let's have coffee. I would love to find out how this is working. What are some topics of different studies that y'all have been doing? We would love to be able to offer this here. Would you consider, all of those things, but don't be afraid to just name it and go after it, and converse about, how could we maybe do it even, take what you've gained from doing this study with this group, how could we maybe even do it better, or how could we offer something that's not exactly the same but in addition to. So yeah,
that's the thing. I wanted to invite them to not do that. I would just say, what's something that we could do here that would, you don't necessarily have to imply they have to quit, because if they find something that works really well in their home church, that's going to be what they gravitate anyway. So you don't necessarily have to worry about the other church. You just are worried about how does this happen here? What are the needs here? What would work? What are you experiencing in that city that would work really well here? And what are some things that you think we would have to, need to change to make work with our group or with our setting, or, whatever.
Michelle, do you mind do you need to close with anything?
I'm good.
In addition, I am so blown away by everything that you have provided. My apologies for coming in late, but this has been so rich. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you sharing the document. And I will include that link to that also in our follow-up email that I send probably the first of next week. I wanted to share with you that in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about bridge events. We're going to talk specifically about we're gonna move away from worship. We're gonna start talking about some events and some ways that we can be intentional other than worship, and using an online ministry. So I hope you get excited for that. In closing, I wanted to share with you 10 things that I am attending the Church of the Resurrection Leadership Institute this year online. And I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't even tuned into any of it today, but that's why it's on. That's always a good thing to do, is to register for the online so that you can get it on demand. And but what I have picked up so far was 10 things that I really wanted to share with you that were offered to everyone attending online. And it was from Reverend Robert Johnson, who is a Church of the Resurrection. He's the Leawood location pastor. And I'm going to copy and paste and send these things to you in your email as well. But it's just some excellent questions to ask yourself. Are you a high functioning church? And some great things to consider. So number one, how do our local churches need to change? Asking, how do we need to change? Number two, what forms of ministry are that we find that we've been doing forever are now irrelevant and ineffective? Naming them, just naming them. Number three, who are the people that we reach now that we could not reach before the pandemic? Fascinating to name those people, name that group. Number four, what values did we move away from that need to be rekindled and embraced? What did we move away from during the pandemic, during the midst of, major COVID? What did we move away from that really need to be rekindled and embraced? Number five, what has been effective pre-pandemic? What has been effective during the pandemic? And what has been effective post-pandemic? Creating 3 different groups and naming effective ministries in all 3 of those situational pieces. Times. Number 6, high functioning churches practice humility. Humility builds community. Humility facilitates unity. And humility invokes the favor of God. It's okay to mess up, own it, and move on. Number 7, high-functioning churches keep asking their members to keep doing things. Oftentimes, we know that people are busy, and so we go, you know what, we're going to give them a break. Not high-functioning churches. High-functioning churches are willing to compete for the commitments. They know that serving the church and Jesus Christ is the greatest gift. They compete for commitment time. Number 8, high-functioning churches are clear that they are here to make disciples exceptionally and intentionally and relentless in bringing people to Jesus Christ. They refuse to let any person, program, or initiative cover up or overshadow the objective of making disciples, and they budget accordingly. Number 9, high-functioning churches practice kingdom courage. New ways, new people, new mission fields. Kingdom courage. I love that. And number 10, high-functioning churches know that when the challenge of newness feels hard and scary, that you can ask the same Holy Spirit who led you to that challenge to bring the courage needed to meet the demands of that challenge. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that just some powerful words to leave with today? And I will send all of these things to you. And if I gather any more information, I will share those with you as well from being at Leadership Institute this week online. Would anyone like to close us out in prayer? We are right at 10:30. Melissa, would you close us out?
Okay. It took me a minute to figure out where the buttons
okay.
were.
I'm still here on the side.
Oh, good. Hey, Gary.
Hey, this has been fantastic. So
yes,
thank you all so much.
Let us pray. Dear Lord, we just thank you and praise you for this day. Every day you give us, we know is a blessing. And Lord, we know that there is so much that we can still do, whether it is in person or online. Lord, the information that we've been given today has been outstanding. I pray that each and every one of us that have been here and those that maybe will watch this later at given times, that their hearts and minds are touched and stirred by your Holy Spirit to know all the right things that we need to do to reach further and further out in our communities around us and in our world to make a huge difference for your kingdom. I pray your blessings to be upon each and every one present and those who will watch later. I pray your blessings to be upon those in our conference office, Amy and Michelle, and all of those who are working diligently to bring these things together to help us grow, Lord, in wisdom, insight, as we continue to grow as your disciples, being everything you've created us to be in the community that we go out in or around daily. So we thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this group and look forward, Lord, to all that you're going to continue to do through each and every one of us in Christ's holy name. Amen.
Amen.